Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Russo, and today I'll be sharing a presentation on teaching arts and sciences that I created with Megan O'Farrell based on a TED Talk given by Mae Jemison. Dr. Mae Jemison is an astronaut, a doctor, an art collector, and a dancer. Telling stories from her own education and from her time in space, she calls on educators to teach both the arts and sciences, both intuition and logic as one, to create bold thinkers. Here is a link to her TED Talk on teaching on art and sciences. You can also visit the shortened link to have easier access. So we begin with the path towards revitalizing the arts and sciences. And she quotes the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, who says, "If you don't care much where you want to get to, it doesn't much matter which way you go." And she vehemently disagrees with this because it's important to care about where we're going, and we really care about the direction that our future takes. So from this, we have a quote by Zora Neale Hurston: "Research is formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with a purpose." So we have this purpose-driven idea behind this education, and also it's driven by that curiosity, and we can find that in that path, on that path towards revitalizing the arts and sciences. She talks about the legacy of innovation and how what we do now is especially important 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. From genetic engineering and the internet to 3D weaving and laser scanners, new innovations are based on abstract ideas and creativity from years before. So we need to be doing things right now that will lead to those same types of innovation in the future. And she's concerned that we're not on that trajectory to be as great as we were, especially in the United States. So in asking that question, what are we contributing to that legacy? She sees a lot of fragmentation and separation, especially in education, for how we teach arts and sciences so separately. And she believes that we're lagging behind. So there is this feeling of a wake-up call that's needed, and it can be found in this interdisciplinary approach that she's discussing in this TED Talk. When she talks about reconciling science and the arts, she quotes Frantz Fanon, psychiatrist, who says, "Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission and fulfill or betray it." So that is a decision point that we're at now with education. Are we going to fulfill an education that is going to reconcile these science and arts, or are we going to continue down a path that separates that in the large picture? So for Jemison, our mission is to reconcile, reintegrate science and arts, and it is addressing that schism that exists in pop culture. And of course, we know the brain is not as simplified as this, but we can think of that as a left brain, right brain dichotomy. And it's about understanding the whole brain view. And she's very much a holistic person. And that's exactly right. She thinks that people are accepting this dichotomy between science and the arts, and that's informing how we build a foundation of our world. And that is not a good thing. We need to see that that's there, that dichotomy, but accept a new path forward that's able to see the interdisciplinary aspect of those two disciplines. We can't box ourselves into just thinking logically or just creatively. We can be both. And there are many people that do exhibit both of these sides very successfully. Going back to her own childhood, she really shows that she was able to walk that balance. Even though there was not as much of an interdisciplinary focus, she found herself pursuing vastly different interests at the same time. As a youth, making doll clothes, and at the same time following the Apollo space program. When she went to college, she majored in chemical engineering, but she said that people thought that she was also a political science major. She was so focused on being the Black Student Union president, and at the same time, she was working long hours choreographing dance productions. So obviously a very brilliant person, but at the same time, she saw the value that affects at a neurological level, and also just on a real world level of what happens when you do have this holistic approach and you're able to use that intuition as well as the analytical side. I thought it was so cool that she talked about bringing art to space. because space obviously represents this final frontier in the technology that is required for us to get there is immense. Yet what she brought up with her were items that for her represented human creativity that really bridged science and the arts with this mission. And those items were a poster of Judith Jemison performing Cry, a Bundu statue from the Women's Society in West Africa, and a flag from the oldest African-American women's sorority in the United States. And it's really something to hear her talk poetically about what these various items stand for her, but also how it reconciles art and science. For example, the Bundu statue is also showing the degree of analysis and craftsmanship that it took to create such a work of art. And it should also be acknowledged that the Greek root techne does in fact mean art. So it seems perhaps in more ancient times, there was an understanding of that connection between science and logic and rational, but also the exquisite craftsmanship that comes with the arts. She says that one place we need to reconcile science and the arts is in our mind. She has this wonderful quote by Albert Einstein: "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science." So I think this is really the big picture view, whether it's physics or whether it's a poet. They're both, a physicist or a poet, are both describing the same thing, but from different viewpoints. And by leaving that mystery there of saying they're both approaching it from different perspectives that are equally valid in different contexts, this gives us that holistic view. She talks about how dance, of course, one of the great arts, expresses the jubilation in life, but at the same time, and this is with the integration of the scientific approach, the dancer must know what movements to make so that her movements come across correctly. And when she looks at the difference between art and science, there are these ideas of constructive versus deconstructive. And from a scientific perspective, it could make sense at first to see science as deconstructive, certainly in looking at atoms or molecules or pulling things apart, as she refers to it as, there is that element. But at the same time, analysis, it has to be known, is also breaking down into lysis with its etymology, and that does have to do with breaking things apart. So you do need that, and that's valuable, but at the same time, it's also constructive. So biotechnology, and then of course, many things in art are constructive as well, like sculpting. But if you look at a single block, right, that could also be looking at that as taking away what doesn't belong to that design. So that is being deconstructed. So this might seem like it's just about etymology, but it's really about systems design and how we can see both of these factors playing a role. So as I said with the quote from Einstein, that both the arts and scientists, they're manifestations of the same source. I love that May uses this word of avatars of human creativity, and they certainly do have these archetypal qualities to them. And we do use them both to build an understanding of the universe. And rather than having it be an either or, I think that our worldview is enriched by considering both of them. So we're trying to influence the world around us, and at the same time, we are influencing ourselves, and both science and the arts have a huge role to play in that. There is a big difference that she mentions between the two. She says that science aims to express our understanding to influence the universe external to ourselves, and its truth are less reliant on us as individuals, but it studies the universe that we all universally experience. So there is a degree of taking the human out of the equation a little bit, although that's complicated by quantum physics. But art, on the other hand, is radically subjective. It's all about the peculiarity of the individual and their desire to share or influence others based on their experience. So again, it's not trying to reduce science or art to the same thing. It's saying by being different manifestations, they have different capacities. So the same picture, the intuitive, which we can see is on the right side, the rainbow color brain, and the analytical, which is numbers. And of course, these are abstract ideas, but what we do is we create culture around them. So we think intuitive, in touch with yourself, nature, relationships. And I definitely resonate with that. And at the same time, I resonate with analysis, putting your mind to work, that idea of breaking something down to rebuild up again. One of the issues she mentions is that it is problematic to perhaps elevate either one to the top, but especially with analysis is this highest scientific truth, because it then obscures some other truths by giving it such a preeminent position. I'll get into that a little later. Now, artists say scientists are too concrete and disconnected from the world, which I think could be true. And at the same time, I think artists have lessons to learn from scientists. So that also is brought up within this interdisciplinary framework. And as I've made this point several times now, you'd be foolish just to choose one over the other when you are both and can be more of both. She talks about understanding, and that understanding of science and art, as well as the resources that we have, it generates outcomes that are so essential to the quality of our life. Our collective will, Jemison says, is to generate a vision to positively influence these outcomes. So design and engineering, craftsmanship, and skilled labor, they're all factors that can achieve those better outcomes when we understand how science and the arts are complementary in each practice. So imagine an engineer that is equally able to access that creative, intuitive side, but still has all the science. So this is one of the benefits that this approach has. She ran a program when she was teaching at Dartmouth. It was called Seeing the Future. C stood for Science, Engineering, and Education is the acronym. And she talked to people of all different backgrounds, from scientists to theologians, focusing on the most effective use of government funding. So Jemison and her colleagues had many observations from all of this research and discussion. And it began with just discussing the circumstances in the United States having changed over the last 8 decades in the sciences and engineering, where in the past it was more geared toward political, military, and social competition. And there were definite benefits that came out of this. One that she cites is the ballet in Russia and how that caused the ballet in the United States to improve as a result of that competition. However, as we move more toward an egalitarian world and hopefully less competition between nations, this opens up for greater collaboration in refocusing the sciences and engineering on more humanitarian projects to make life better for everyone. Another thing that Jemison mentions is our infrastructure that supports the science and arts are becoming obsolete. She gives an example of museums closing, of high school classrooms that don't have adequate science labs, and underfunding of the arts. She also discusses media not supporting the dissemination of information needed to operate in everyday life or participate in democracy. So people feeling disenfranchised, not being able to get that message out so that we can understand the role that both art and science has to play in public policy as part of that. She also talks about changes that need to happen in the corporate world, specifically with corporate mentality that's focused on short-term profits, where they put more energy into those short-term product development than in long-term engineering and science research, which would definitely bear out more of that connection of the arts and sciences that would, again, go to help the enrichment of people in relation with business. She also talks about governments recognizing cost benefits of basic science and engineering research that is being underfunded. Students, she believes, should also be instructed to have the skills to be global citizens and the resources necessary to support this goal. So that's a really large vision, and that definitely comes from a holistic education mindset. As I mentioned, that need for funding the arts, the fine arts being in decline, the National Education Association being underfunded. So this is part of what's fueling her to say we need to revitalize the arts and sciences, and this can be done in a complementary manner. She also talks about repairing the mind-body dichotomy. In medical school, Jemison was taught to concur with what the machine said about bodies. She would ask patients questions, but was told don't listen to what the patient said, even though we know patients have a deep understanding of their bodies. Yet these days, we're trying to divorce patients from that idea, she says. So there is this seemingly enforced dichotomy in our culture, and we need to recognize that intuition coming from the patients as well as the tests from a machine have different value, but deserve that consideration. So this is about reconciling the patient's knowledge of their bodies with the physician's measurements. And I think this applies to education as well. If we can think of students who may not be performing well on tests or measurements, but from that rapport with the teacher in the classroom, we can see that student is bright and they just need that right atmosphere to flourish. Another aspect she talks about is bolstering self-awareness, that when we only see from separate parts, we don't get a full picture. One of the interesting aspects she focuses on is bioinstrumentation. So those are ways, devices measuring and evaluating and treating biological systems. But what's curious about this is it's not in a limiting sense. She sees so many possibilities for using our senses. We shouldn't create machines that measure road rage, which could lead to forgetting how to control her emotions without the machines. That would be losing our humanity. So that's a very valuable aspect of this TED Talk, is knowing that we can't go so far in one direction with technology that we forget what makes us human in the first place. Closing insights. She founded the Biosensing Corporation with this mindset of integrating sciences in the arts, mind and body, the intuitive in the analytical, and that's very much born out of her own life experience. And I think that presents a very cool picture for students that they can emulate, because she talks about being an entrepreneur. And again, it's this understanding, it's this holistic approach, mind and body, intuitive, analytical, that come through a true integration of the science and arts that makes that possible. She talks though about how talk is not necessarily cheap, but it's all about action, and uses the science metaphor of ideas being like potential energy, like a ball that doesn't have any energy until we drop it. We risk putting it into action. So we really need to revitalize the arts and sciences, because this is taking responsibility for the future. I think that this is something that administrators, teachers, and even students listening to and watching to will make them think of ways, how can we further integrate this so we can repair our worldview and see everything is less separated out. She ends with this quote. It's the 3 questions of great concern. Is it attractive? That's intuitive. So that's on the artistic side. Is it amusing? The analytical, of course, that's on that side. And does it know its place? The balance. And that is really what it's all about, because it's about where, when, and how you are implementing these different approaches at the same time, or at different times, but I suppose at the same time as well, because we're not trying to separate them out. A solution will have sometimes both intuitive and analytical aspects to it. We also discussed investigatable questions that we could ask as action researchers. And this first question is, how would the implementation of an integrated arts and sciences curriculum at an early age, say first grade, cause students' perception of the union of these two disciplines? So Jemison centers her talk on the false dichotomy between the two. We talked about that. And she shares her view, which is very credible given her pedigree in both fields. And again, just repeating those manifestations of the same thing, attempting reconstructing the reality that we find around us, attempting to show and recreate the universe that we all experience. So as opposed to presenting each field as mutually exclusive, what if we began integrating them at the very beginning of our children's education? How would that change the way students saw their relationships and indeed develop their whole worldview? What effect would the implementation of a STEAM, that is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics curriculum, have on students' academic achievement? That's our second question. And in that, we're thinking of how could we measure the effects that a curriculum has on student achievement, which focuses on uniting various scientific disciplines with the arts. Would students reach higher academic levels of success and unlock a deeper understanding if they were to study the arts and sciences together versus choosing two divergent paths of study, being either arts or sciences? So this is a massive question, but in a small setting, it could be implemented and it could be judged relative to other classrooms or control groups that are not doing that, as well as using surveys of students to hear their feedback on the STEAM implementation process and seeing how it affects their achievement in various categories, such as assessment. The third question, how would an interdisciplinary project which weaves together the arts and sciences, affect students' view of the usefulness each respective field offers the other? And this is such a beautiful question, and it's engaging that holistic view. If educators were to offer at least one interdisciplinary project through the year, ideally more, which united the arts and sciences, would this project serve to deepen students' understanding of each field and their ability to engage in higher levels of self-expression and self-awareness? Would students be able to unlock higher levels of thinking within scientific disciplines if they approach them from an artistic standpoint, like a dance, photography presentation about the Higgs particle discovery, or vice versa, appreciating how to mix paint in scientific proportions to achieve the perfect hue, or studying the flora and fauna of an ancient cave painting? So these are just some examples. Investigatable question 4. How does expressing scientific concepts through artistic means affect a student's ability to understand and master those scientific concepts? The student's ability to master scientific concepts impacted when they incorporate the arts into the way they approach them. If a student is studying stem cell research and as a part of their research creates a performance dance piece to represent their discoveries, would these same students score higher on exams which test their scientific knowledge? Again, that's a way to put that into practice. Would it lead them to ask questions they otherwise never would have asked during their research? And I think that's very valuable because incorporating that approach, you would have different question sets. The fifth investigatable question is, do students who study a STEAM curriculum versus a STEM curriculum demonstrate higher levels of achievement and or success at scientific competitions? And or do students who study a STEAM curriculum versus a STEM curriculum demonstrate higher levels of achievement or success at art competitions? So when students enter different academic competitions, are we seeing a trend when it comes to the victors of these competitions in terms of their curriculum of study? Are students more successful in traditionally science competitions like robotics or chemistry Olympiad if they've been educated in the arts and forced to integrate the arts into their scientific understanding? And similarly, are art students who enter traditionally arts competitions, both visual and performing, more successful because if they've been trained in different scientific disciplines, maybe that will give them a certain edge or an added perspective? Do they reach higher levels of self-expression and self-awareness? We also came up with some additional investigatable questions. If English teachers at my school are trained in implementing STEAM curriculum in the classroom, will it have a positive effect on student engagement? Again, when we look at realistically implementing that as an English teacher, my thinking is, how can I include articles on engineering or math or science and at the same time bring out the art in those articles? And how can I measure that effect through student surveys or critical reading assessments? Can a STEAM curriculum enhance critical thinking and problem solving skills for freshman biology students? Again, the idea of specifically focusing on a traditionally science-based class, well, this biology is a science class, and thinking about how to bring art to that. I remember in my 6th grade class, we made our classroom a living cell. So something to that extent, except more academic in the sense of really critical thinking and problem solving benchmarks for those skills and how art in particular will play a role for those students. The very last question, can an integrated arts and sciences curriculum positively impact student performance enough to warrant more federal funding for further implementation of this type of curriculum? So May is very concerned about more funding for the arts and sciences, and in particular, if this curriculum and more curriculum development was to show the proof, the evidence-based approach of why this is helpful to students, would that be enough that, say, the Massachusetts Department of Education, secondary schooling, would they be able to get more funding themselves to help bring that curriculum into more classrooms. Or again, it could be at a state or a federal level, but that's the line of thinking, is how to increase this type of curriculum and using evidence-based methods to show it. So this is my list. This is our list of references. And thank you so much for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, please contact myself or Megan O'Farrell via email. And we're very excited to be able to share this with you, and hope that if you're a teacher, you're able to implement this into your classroom more, show the TED Talk. And if you're a student, I hope that you're inspired to see from a more holistic point of view that uses both of these approaches, both for academic excellence and just for having a better understanding of your life and how to live it. Thank you again, and have a great day.